there we get to the next point. Telesur, you're now there. What is Telesur and what is Empire Files?
So I wanted to say really quickly about RT is that I had more freedom there and I was able to pave more editorial freedom than virtually anyone at corporate media. So there's limitations and there's framing and there's parameters of debate that you're allowed to say, right? At RT, I was able to pave so much editorial freedom that I was actually challenging my funder over and over again. And what the whole experience showed me was not only do we have an enormous amount of freedom there where we can really talk about anything, but that shows you what corporate media anchors and pundits and journalists don't do. They don't put their jobs on the line. They don't put themselves on the line to fight for that editorial freedom and to say, no, I'm not going to cover this story today, or I am going to do this, and I'm going to put my job on the line to do so. RT is simply an alternative. That's why it's such a threat to this corporate media narrative, because it provides that space to challenge, right, the corporatocracy, challenge capitalism, challenge empire. That's why I worked there. Telesur is different. Because, you know, in a world where we're fostering this Cold War mentality against Russia, I think it's really important to have RT. I think it's important to hear what Russia has to say and the perspectives that Russia brings. But Telesur came out of a contagion of this pink tide, this progressivism that erupted in Latin America. We're talking about a region of the world that was subjugated and ravaged by colonialism for decades, if not centuries. Cuba was always an anomaly, but with the election of Hugo Chavez in 1999, I think sparked this movement. And so Telesur came out of a joint venture with Hugo Chavez and Fidel Castro to counter that corporate media narrative that was set as a weapon to destroy these countries, to destroy their democratically elected leaderships. And it's a joint venture between 6 countries right now: Bolivia, Nicaragua, Uruguay, Cuba, Ecuador, and Venezuela. And I'm honored because I feel like it really fits within my value system, because they really tell that kind of Marxist perspective and the working class perspective, and telling the voices of the marginalized and oppressed who have been completely obfuscated from our history books and the entire narratives of what we know about realities in. The Empire Files is a show where it's a long-form documentary show and investigative series that sees every issue through the lens of US empire, because you cannot look at the world either internationally or domestically in the US without looking through that lens. The world needs to be looked at in terms of colonized and colonizers. You know, in terms of Israel, we love to use Israel as that military garrison in the Middle East because it's surrounded by kind of these post-colonial, semi-independent states that haven't kowtowed to US economic hegemony yet. So that's why we like Israel in that center. But the Empire Files retells these stories, retells these narratives, uplifts the voices of those marginalized and oppressed people who haven't had their chance to tell their stories, and reclaiming the narratives that have been written by the victors. And we've had the chance to go to these countries and be on the ground and see firsthand how just completely, patently absurd the corporate media narratives are everywhere from Colombia to Venezuela.
So talk about Ecuador, Venezuela, and Colombia. I mean, it's really interesting because the indigenous people in these countries do not get a voice. First of all, there's this language barrier, obviously, and the second of all, who wants to go in the jungles of these places and spend millions of euros or dollars to talk to these people and their concerns? What are the concerns of the indigenous people, and what sort of challenges are they facing both domestically and internationally?
Well, it differs country to country, but I mean, Ecuador is a really interesting example because I went to the rainforest, this pristine rainforest that has just been completely savaged by Chevron. And so I saw Chevron, the massive oil company that, you know, also sponsors a lot of corporate media. So, you know, corporate media is basically subsidized by defense contractors and oil companies. But when I was in the rainforest, you know, talking to victims who were indigenous there and who have died since from contamination, and it was an insight in how Ecuador was before President Correa took it and challenged the empire and started giving more rights to indigenous people. And the indigenous movement had backed him in his presidency. And he gave rights to nature, which was a really monument in the Constitution, correct. And so you kind of saw, you know, pre-colonial and post-colonial mentality there, where they had just opened their country up to be ravaged by imperialism, and then they were trying to fight back against that. In terms of Venezuela,